Hello and welcome. In this video, I'll be addressing the questions and comments made during the 1000 subscriber special, and unfortunately it took a little while for this video to come out, so it's a bit late, but I thought you guys had some awesome questions and I would answer them in this video. I'd like to start off by saying sorry to everyone whose name I'm going to mispronounce, but let's get into the questions. I will put up the questions on screen so that you can see them. The first question we have was from Blake Gregory, and the question was, what did you find most enjoyable and what did you find most difficult about getting into 40k when you were first starting out? I would say the answer to both those is the same thing, which is the complexity of the game. On one hand, it's really exciting to get into a system this complex, especially when you realize that it means it gives you a lot of ability to innovate and find different things that people might have missed. However, even as someone who is returning to the game and isn't necessarily new to the game, it does become kind of difficult to understand all the rules and all the interactions, so it is a bit of a double-edged sword on that, especially when Games Workshop has a lot of similar rules that have different names, and sometimes you're not really sure how they all play together, because it would have been nice if they had that kind of style name and then underneath in parentheses it just said something like Deep Strike or, you know, something of that nature, so that we kind of right away knew what the ability was. And I understand it adds flavor to the different armies, but at the same time there should be a way of making it easier for people to understand. And I think it would also clear up a lot of issues, because if you saw two abilities with the same keyword and you know those keywords don't stack, as some people believe, because sometimes there's like two feel no pain abilities and you sometimes might mistakenly think that you can use both when in reality you can only use one or the other, that would solve a lot of things, I think. Isra says, I think something I'd like to see is an all-inclusive ranking video for all of the models in an army. And then he follows up with, my question for you is, what hobbies outside of Warhammer do you have? Things like video games, sports, and music. For the first part of that, I would definitely say that's a good idea, and I'll probably do it at some point. I don't know why I really hadn't thought of it before. I figured there were plenty of ranking videos, and while I do rank the units within their own unit video, I do think it would be good for people to see how different units rank against each other as well, because that is some valuable information. As for my other hobbies, I would say there's a lot of different things. I like to read and stuff like that. I do play some video games, but mostly just casual games like Hearthstone and things like that. I haven't even finished Mechanicus yet, even though I keep picking it up and starting over and then putting it down. I used to play a lot more video games and I just kind of haven't recently. It would be something I'd like to get more into again. For sports, I'm not that into them, but I do like watching Ultimate Fighting Championships and mixed martial arts. Though I'd say for those, my favorite were back in the day when Pride was still a thing and you had fighters like Vanderlei Silva who were absolutely brutal, as well as really weird show matches that were incredible mismatches, because it was always fun to see kind of that interaction play out, versus today where it's a lot more regulated, and sometimes because both opponents are so technically skilled, it does take away some of that explosiveness you saw in the past. For music, I would say there's a lot of different music I listen to. There's no one genre of music I listen to. It's actually kind of a mix of everything, and a lot of times there will be one or two songs I'll listen from an artist and pretty much nothing else. That one's kind of hard to pin down, and I actually don't know really what my preference in music is, but I do put on random songs and things like that on YouTube. My playlists are all over the place, so make of it as you will. Aaron Martin says, I'd say my favorite thing has been some of your off-meta lists, and the example he gives is the 2000 point Lucius list within the 2000 point AdMech video, and I would agree with that because I found a lot of fun making these videos, as it gave me a lot of opportunity to explore some very interesting lists. And the nice thing about it is that it shows players that the tournament scene isn't just one list and one way to play, but rather there's a lot of variety, and I'm looking forward to making some more updates on unique lists in the future for all the different armies that I cover. The Regner asks, why did you choose to play AdMech? And then adds a comment of, I've also been looking into Gene Stealer cults as my next army, so tips and tricks on them would be useful, but I understand that wouldn't be very effective from the channel's point of view, as they are very weak and expensive, leading to low amounts of players, so I think Space Marines would be the best choice to help both you and the community, and me specifically, as my dad plays Space Marines, and I really want to help him learn his tools and units. So to answer the first part of that, the reason I chose AdMech was actually because I've always been into kind of that, you know, cyborg, robot, sci-fi element. If you've ever heard of transhumanism, I'm sure a lot more people have now that Cyberpunk 2077 or whatever is out. I've always been interested in that because it does seem like something logical that would create this prosthesis that would not only help people who are injured in some way, but also in a way to augment ourselves. So that was a lot of what attracted me to them. There were other armies that I was considering at the time, but things like the Dunecrawl and the Taraxi were just too cool to pass up. As for covering armies with smaller player bases such as Gene Stealer cults and the like, I would actually say as a channel it makes a little more sense to cover them than Space Marines, mostly because I'm still a really small channel, so if I cover something like Space Marines, there'll be a lot more options for people to go to, and I'll probably not even show up on the search results when people look for it. So making guides on armies that are less popular is actually a better way of generating more viewers, because there are so few people making content for those armies. However, at the same time, one thing that I'm always worried about is if I do cover something like the Gene Stealer cults, and what I'm worried might happen is that as I cover it or as I finish, they might release a new codex because their codex is rather old or rather weak, and that's never fun because I would be putting in so much effort into something only for me to have to restart it pretty much instantly. And this is something I'm kind of looking at the Sisters of Battle right now, because it does feel kind of bad that I just finished the series and in a month or so I might have to redo the whole thing because there is a chance that a new codex is coming out. And part of the reason I chose them, even though they're a less popular one, was because they had a newer codex, so that I could at least put the series out and kind of have it out there for a little while before having to go back to it, and that would give me a little bit of an opportunity to cover other armies as well. Though at the end of the day I don't mind going back to it because it is a fun army to cover, and all of the armies I've covered so far are very fun. So I definitely want to cover Genestealer cults at some point because I do think they're pretty cool, and Tyranids as well. It's just a matter of how do I want to approach it. If I knew that Games Workshop wasn't putting out a codex for them in the near future, I would definitely cover them now, but as it stands I'm just a little hesitant on that side. And thinking about it, I've been kind of avoiding Space Marines, though I do think I should probably make a series on them because there are a lot of people who do play them and who would probably benefit from it as well, and I shouldn't just avoid them simply because they're popular. James Crowder says congratulations, and I say thank you very much. Mr. Epic asks, how many more models do you have? I probably have way too many models, and I'll put on screen the models I have finished outside of the ones that I've done as a one-off for the videos, as well as my pile of shame so you can all see it, as it's rather massive and it's only growing by the day. One of these days I'll finish all these models, but by then it'll probably be 6 times as large. Oh well. Lamb999 says, as others said, came for the AdMech, enjoyed the rest, thank you very much. And then they proceed a question, with their question being, what other hobbies and interests do you have, and do you have a full-time career right now? For my hobbies, I'm into reading, I'm into investing, I'm into a lot of things like that. I like playing a few video games here and there, nothing too exciting. I'm actually kind of a very boring person. As for a career, I'm in the engineering and product management space, as well as customer training and all kinds of things like that. I wear a lot of different hats for the company that I work with, and that's why sometimes I can put out 2 videos a week, sometimes I can only put out 1, because depending if I'm traveling and things like that, I might not be able to really work on a video, and it also depends on my workload at my job. One thing I will say is getting into YouTube and making these videos is it did show me that maybe I want a little bit of a change in my life, because I am kind of getting burnt out on the 9 to 5 thing, and I'd like to pursue a little bit more of a creative career, and luckily I'm probably in a position where I can do that in the future. It's not going to be tomorrow, but there might be a period within the next year where I kind of take a step back and try something different for a little while and see if I can make it work, and then if I can't make it work, then maybe in 6 months I find another job in the same field, or even go back to a company that I currently work with, because I'll probably still have that opportunity. So I'm very fortunate in that sense, and I'm happy I can have that opportunity because I know a lot of people don't, and it's something I'd like to take advantage of because that's just the kind of person I am. I do like to make a change in my life every now and then and experiment and try new things in that sense. The next question comes from Dartle1, and it is, what are some other armies you are planning to do a deep dive on? You did AdMech, Sisters, and Necrons already, so what else might you have in mind? And then they follow up with saying they would like to see a deep dive into Tyranids and Genestealers. And to answer that, I did start a Death Guard series just recently, so that should be out by the time this video is up. And what I have in mind is I do plan to cover pretty much all of the different armies over time. It's just a matter of which ones do I do first, and right now I think I'm focusing more on the ones that have a newer codex or had a codex recently come out, simply because, as I mentioned before, I don't want to be in the situation where I'm either midway in the series or I just finished the series and a brand new codex comes out and I have to restart everything from scratch, simply because it's kind of a bummer to do that. And to add to that, I really wish Games Workshop was more transparent in how they presented the release schedule for the different codexes, because it would make it really easy to kind of plan this out, because I really want to do Tyranids and Genestealer cults. I'm just afraid that they might get a codex sooner than later and I'll pretty much have to redo everything the next day. But if I knew that the codex was coming out at the end of the year, for example, I would probably start the series now and proceed with it. So it's a little unfortunate on that end that I can't kind of have that flexibility. However, there are a lot of codexes that already came out, so I do have a lot of opportunity and flexibility in that sense at least. The user Nobody said that they would like to see updates to the AdMech, and I'll say in the future I definitely will have updates to the AdMech and other armies that I've covered. It's just that there hasn't been too much going on, simply because the last update in terms of points and everything else, the only thing that really changed for the AdMech was that the servitors with multi-meltas got a little bit cheaper, but otherwise we pretty much stayed the same, and there haven't been that many big tournaments, so there haven't been that many exciting lists coming out as a result. I'm hoping that once things open up again and we start seeing kind of more tournaments, there'll be more interesting tournament lists to cover in that regard, as well as other things happening within the game. I definitely have at least one list that I want to cover, and you'll probably see a video in the near future with a couple AdMech lists in it. And then there's another project that I'm working on that's a little bit further out that has an update onto one of the lists we already looked at with the person who created the list and how they piloted it within tournaments. So that's going to be a lot of fun in that sense as well. So there is more AdMech content coming out in the near future. And once Warzone Sheridan comes out, I'm definitely covering that as well. So that's going to be an addition to the series once that's out. Doom King Ray says, thank you for helping me with my Sisters of Battle army. I'd like to say thank you for being a viewer, and I'm very happy to be of help. Liam Hobbs has a few different questions, and I'll go through them one by one, as I think there's a lot of good suggestions and questions that Liam presented in his post. First, we'll look at a few features that he'd like added. The first one is bat reps testing the army list featured in your videos. I'd like to do that, but it's a little bit tricky, as it requires kind of having someone with those units, as well as a setup. So right now it's more of an issue that I just don't have a good way of filming them. But once I can figure that one out, you'll probably see some in the future, especially once I get kind of more of my army completed. He would also like to see more painting videos, definitely on the horizon. It's just that they take forever to make, and it's just right now I haven't been painting anything that was particularly interesting, though I'd like to make another one sometime in the future. And finally, other things he'd like to see is a collection/army showcase, and a pile of shame video seems obligatory for any Warhammer channel, and if I wanted to suffer, I would calculate how much it would cost if I bought it all today. And for that one, I'll actually put on screen the amount of AdMech that I have painted up right now, as well as the pile of shame, which I don't really want to know how much it costs because I'm sure it's way too much, and I'm sure it's going to take way too long to get through, though it probably wasn't too bad because most of us were probably 20% off when I bought it, so at least there was that savings. As for the questions from Liam, we'll go through them one by one as well. The first one is, what got you into the hobby? Well, when I was younger, I was always interested into things like Magic the Gathering and miniatures and things like that. So one day there were some kids at the same middle school that I was in who were talking about this game that they started playing that had these miniatures, and I didn't even know there was a store that sold anything like that because back then there were really only card stores where I lived. I asked them, hey, can you show me where the store is? So we ended up going to the store, which is a store called Danger Plant that I don't think exists anymore, and that store was very much a miniature store, so I was very excited, and I decided to buy an army that none of my friends played, which was either Dark Elder or Necrons at the time, and I ended up going with Necrons, which was my very first models, and then over time I ended up getting in and out of the game multiple times, so it's always been kind of an on and off hobby with me buying a bunch of models, painting them up, and either selling the rest or just putting them to storage somewhere that I don't remember anymore, unfortunately. And I even played other games like War Machine and things like that when they were popular, so it's definitely been a hobby that's been with me since I was rather young, and it's one that I really enjoy, so I don't think I'll be getting out of it anytime soon, because Games Workshop really started treating the rule system as a game as opposed to just an afterthought, because I remember around 6th to 7th edition when I came back the last time, everyone was always telling me that no, Games Workshop is a model company, not a game company, and now it seems like they're trying to be both as opposed to one or the other, which is nice to see. The next question is, do you have experience painting beforehand? Do you paint anything else other than miniatures? No, I really only paint miniatures, but I've been painting for a long time, on and off. I wouldn't say I'm a particularly great painter because when I look at some of these painting channels, I'm just completely blown away, but what I would say is I put a lot of time into every model, and that's probably why they look the way they do. It's simply a matter of how much time I put into them more than anything else. The next question is, Warhammer 40k your primary hobby? At the moment, if you consider YouTube as part of that, I would say yes, because I've just been having such a fun time making the videos and learning everything I can about all these different armies. Though as a whole, I would say there's a lot of different hobbies I'm into, but most of them are pretty boring, so Warhammer's probably the one that's the most interesting. The next question is, are you a tabletop hobbyist exclusively, or do you enjoy the settings, other media? I'm assuming you're asking about the Warhammer universe. In that case, yes, because I really enjoy making these YouTube videos, but also I do play Mechanicus on and off because it's a fun game. It's just one of those games that I kind of pick up, play for a while, then put down, and don't come back to for a long time. I have started reading one of the trilogies for the AdMech in terms of one of their books. I believe it's Forges of Mars, but I keep getting sidetracked with other books as well, so I definitely enjoy the different aspects of media within Warhammer, and I do play things like video games and other media sources in general, and I do listen to other YouTubers who make lore videos because I just enjoy the lore of Warhammer 40k, as well as some of the music and things like that, because let's be honest, the Mechanicus soundtrack is just amazing, and I love listening to it while painting. Following that, the question is, how do you think Games Workshop and Warhammer could improve? And that's a really good question. I think there's a lot of things they're doing to improve the hobby as it is already, such as putting a lot more focus on the rules, having playtesters, coming out with combat patrol boxes to help reduce price, as well as having things like combat patrol and kill team to help players get into the game at a smaller level instead of having to buy 2,000 points right away. As for things I think they should work on, a big thing I think is that if you look at some of the start collecting kits and you look at some of the regular kits, you realize really quickly how insane the price difference is, and I'd really like to see them bring down the cost of some of those regular kits so that they make more sense to buy, because it's a really bad feeling when you buy a box of Necron Warriors or AdMech Skitarii and realize that you actually made a bad purchase because you could have just bought one of the start collecting kits and saved a bunch of money. And I don't think they have to make the kits comparable in price 1-to-1 because there should be some discount for buying in bulk, but I think it shouldn't be as drastic as it is, and I don't think it should be a case where they increase the cost of a combat patrol or start collecting box simply to make it more in line with the basic kits. I think they should just find a way to reduce the price on the basic Warriors and Skitarii and other units like that. Outside of that, that, I'd like them to have a way of kind of explaining rules a little bit better, because as I mentioned already, there are a lot of rules with different names that do the same exact thing, and it's fine to have the different names in terms of world building and things like that. It's just that at the same time, they should probably have something in parentheses that says this rule is feel no pain, this rule is deep strike, this rule is scout movement, etc., just so people can see it and understand it right away. There's really no reason for them not to have that kind of lexicon in there, and it would make it very easy for people to understand that, hey, you can't use the Graya feel no pain ability on top of the Electro Priest feel no pain ability, for example, because they're both a feel no pain ability and you just pick one or the other to make the roll when it occurs. I understand you can kind of infer that already, but it would just be nice if it was very clear and very simple because of how much complexity there already is in the game and how difficult it could be to understand for a new player. So the more ways they can find to simplify the rules, the better. And finally, Liam asks, what direction do you want the channel to go in? Honestly, I like the direction where it's going now, where I cover different armies and make different series as well as standalone content for Warhammer 40k, but I'd like to expand into other things such as Age of Sigmar and even games like War Machine and things like that. Maybe not to the same extent as, say, I'm doing with 40k, but just as kind of a quick overview or just as a history of the game, because I used to play War Machine and it's kind of interesting to go into it and understand why did the game fail and why did it do this and why did it not do that, as well as other things like that, where the primary focus is on 40k, maybe Age of Sigmar, but then having a little bit of variety videos on the side to go into history and things like that of other games. As for something else that I'd like to do is I'd like to at some point start a second channel, because a lot of the books I read are non-fiction or philosophy and things like that, and I think that's something that isn't covered a lot, because I think a lot of people do read, but it's a lot of things like Game of Thrones, Harry Potter, etc., which there's nothing wrong with reading things like that. It's just that you have a lot of fiction work out there that becomes very popular, but not very many people discussing a lot of things like philosophy and etc. in terms of a literary sense, as well as maybe making it into a channel that looks into self-improvement and things like that, because I think it's very important that people try to always strive to improve themselves and try new things and take risks, etc., and kind of analyze the world around themselves, because I know a lot of times when people hear self-improvement, they think of those very cheesy, corny books, but rather when I say self-improvement, I think of things like critical thinking and introspect and things like that, where you kind of take a step back and challenge yourself with maybe new ideas or things you might not have considered, or reflect upon difficult ideas. I don't know how to structure that channel just yet, but I think it would be something fun to do as a side project. Brady Sternberg says, your army deep dives have been fantastic. Would love more of those for different armies, and I'd like to say thank you. And I definitely intend to make more of them for all the different armies. Hopefully I can make them for every single army, as well as Age of Sigmar at some point, though I don't know anything about Age of Sigmar yet. The next question comes from the Pyro, and he has a comment as well as a question. He says that in regards to the content he'd like to see is something similar to Auspex Tactics, where I go into specific units and synergies and abilities. I think that's a good idea because it would definitely allow me to put out more content, and it would be a good way of making something that doesn't necessarily take up as much time as making one part of a series, which is actually sometimes an incredibly long time investment. This would be a nice shorter video that I could put out and say, hey, here's this information, without having to necessarily structure it as one comprehensive entity like I do with the unit types, where it's very hard to break up the videos without showing everything about that specific topic. So yeah, it's definitely something I should explore. I'm not sure when I'll start or how I'll structure it, but it's a good idea. And also, the Prior had a question, which is, if you had to recolor your AdMech army to a new scheme, what would it be? Well, to answer that, I would say instead of gold and black, I would paint them black and gold. Joking aside though, I think I would have gone with some kind of aquamarine or teal, maybe a purple, because I've seen AdMech armies with those color schemes, and I think they look fantastic, and the armor of the Skitarii kind of lends itself to that kind of teal aquamarine color, I think. Xenos Hive says, joined for the AdMech, saying for the rest, thank you very much, and I'm happy you're enjoying the content. Now that we've covered the questions and comments from the YouTube section, we can look at the couple of questions I got on Reddit. And the first question comes from Brosnahan the Man. I hopefully got that right. Sorry if I got that wrong. He asks, would you ever do a battle report analysis of the armies that you have come up with? I think hearing and seeing some of them played would be great to see. Also, your channel inspired me to make a sister's army, and many things for that. I would say yes, I definitely want to do battle reports in the future. I just need to figure out how to film them and how to structure them, as well as who to play with, because it is something that's kind of a big production, and it would be asking someone to take a lot of time out of their day to be part of that process, as well as finding someone who's okay with being on camera, or at least with filming going on, as well as having some way to capture what's going on in the game. I think there are a lot of very talented battle report channels already, but I definitely want to try to put my own spin on it and see how that works out, and I'm really happy to hear that I could have been of help of getting you inspired to get into a certain faction. Hie7 or HGE7 asks, just wondering what paints you have and what brushes you use. What would you recommend for people starting out? Also, what do you recommend to more advanced painters? This might surprise a lot of people, but all I think I have is one set of Vallejo game colors. It's one of those starter paint kits, and then I bought a few paints here and there just to make my life a little easier so I wasn't blending as many paints together to get the colors that I want. Though I still am blending a lot of paints at a lot of times, so it's kind of a bit of a pain in that sense. I'm always trying to kind of reduce that amount of work. So I actually have a very limited number of paints. I'd say I use about a total of 20 paints or so, some of them very rarely. And as for brushes, I'm actually very hard on my brushes. I don't know if this is just because of the brushes I use or if it's just because of how I paint. I just kind of go on eBay and buy a pack of $5 brushes and use those. I do have a couple nice Sable brushes that were a little more expensive and that I use very rarely for very specific things, but for the most part I just kind of buy a pack of brushes, use them until I destroy them, and then replace them with another one. I'll actually buy something like 5 packs at a time and just go through them, because by the time I finish one box of models I pretty much have to replace the brushes. It's not the most cost effective thing, but I think it's just what works for me, and I'm probably just one of those people who doesn't respect my brushes as much as I should, and unfortunately that's the case. Though I think that's advice for everyone, is don't necessarily look for some kind of magic solution in terms of brushes or paints, but rather experiment and find out what works for you, because everyone's going to be a little bit different, and for some people having some expensive brushes is going to work out very well, and for other people having cheap brushes that are disposable is going to work out better, as well as having a lot of paints or a little bit of paints, because some people do some incredible work with a huge variety of paints, and some people just like mixing paints, and then there's everyone in between. So that's what it really comes down to, is just being willing to experiment and find out what's best for you, because what might work for someone else won't necessarily work for you, and the quicker you kind of figure that one out, the better off you'll be. Anyway, those were some really good questions from everyone. I'd like to thank everyone for watching and everyone who made it to the end. Thank you very much. If you have any additional questions, feel free to ask them in the comment section down below. I'll be happy to answer them. And as always, thank you for watching and have a great day. Bye.